Rain drummed relentlessly against the grimy windows of Ethan Carter's apartment. The cold light of a flickering neon sign seeped through the cracked blinds, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Ethan, a once promising engineer now down on his luck, sat hunched over his battered laptop. His inbox mocked him with rejection emails, each one a reminder of how far he had fallen. "Thank you for your interest, but we regret to inform you." The words blurred together, familiar and lifeless. He closed the laptop with a heavy sigh, his calloused fingers trembling as he pinched the bridge of his nose. Bills piled high on his table, a precarious tower threatening to topple under its weight. His bank account was on life support, and hope seemed a luxury he could no longer afford. Once, he'd dreamed of building machines that could revolutionize space exploration. Now, even affording a cup of decent coffee felt like a distant aspiration. On the other side of the galaxy, Queen Lyra of Antherion stared out of the grand crystalline balcony of her palace. The twin moons of her planet bathed the landscape in a silvery glow, but the beauty of it failed to stir her. The queen, revered and feared in equal measure, carried a loneliness deeper than the vast cosmos her species dominated. Antherion was a planet of elegance and power, its cities floating in the skies, its people thriving with advanced technology. Yet, for all her authority and grandeur, Queen Lyra had never known love. Every suitor who approached her had seen her only as a means to power or prestige. They worshipped her crown but overlooked the heart beating beneath it. On this particular evening, her advisors informed her of Earth, an emerging civilization full of untapped potential. Though primitive by Antherian standards, its people were known for their resourcefulness and unyielding spirit. The queen, yearning for something new, something real, decided to make a diplomatic visit. Little did she know, her arrival on Earth would change her life. And Ethan's forever. Ethan didn't plan on attending the interstellar gala held in honor of Queen Lyra. He hadn't even known about it until his old college friend Sarah had called. "Come on, Ethan. It's the event of the century," she had exclaimed, practically dragging him out of his rut with her enthusiasm. The venue was dazzling, a sprawling hall of glass and gold, shimmering under the glow of 1,000 chandeliers. Ethan felt like a grain of sand amidst a sea of diamonds. Wealth and influence oozed from every corner of the room. His second-hand suit felt like a joke, but Sarah's encouraging smile kept him from bolting. When Queen Lyra entered, the room fell silent. She was a vision of grace and authority, her gown a cascade of iridescent hues that seemed to shimmer with the light of distant galaxies. Her presence was magnetic, her piercing violet eyes scanning the crowd with quiet intensity. Ethan kept to the edges, avoiding the glamour and attention, but fate had other plans. In an awkward attempt to dodge a waiter, he stumbled straight into the queen's path. Gasps erupted from the crowd, her attendants stiffening in alarm. "I'm so sorry," Ethan stammered, his face burning with embarrassment. To his surprise, Lyra raised a hand, halting her guards. "No harm done," she said, her voice smooth and composed, yet tinged with curiosity. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, the room seemed to vanish. Ethan saw something in her gaze, something profoundly human. "Are you enjoying the evening?" she asked. "I don't really belong here," Ethan admitted, his words tumbling out before he could stop them. Lyra's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Perhaps that's what makes you stand out." As quickly as it began, the moment ended, and the queen was whisked away by her entourage. But something in her expression lingered in Ethan's mind, a spark of understanding in a place he least expected it. Queen Lyra's thoughts that night were restless. Ethan's honesty had struck her like a meteor, shattering the veneer of perfection she wore like armor. For years, she had been surrounded by sycophants and opportunists, yet here was a man who seemed utterly out of place, and yet unapologetically himself. Meanwhile, Ethan lay awake in his modest apartment, staring at the cracks in his ceiling. The queen's words echoed in his mind. "Perhaps that's what makes you stand out. Why would someone like her even notice someone like him?" Unbeknownst to either of them, their lives were about to intertwine in ways neither could have predicted. Antharian's diplomatic mission on Earth wasn't as innocent as it appeared. Beneath the surface, factions within Lyra's court plotted to use Earth's resources for their own gain. Their actions threatened not only the fragile peace between worlds, but also the Queen's integrity. Ethan, unwittingly caught in the crossfire, would soon find himself thrust into a conflict that demanded more than he thought he could offer. Together, he and Lyra would have to bridge the vast divide between their worlds, discovering resilience, love, and purpose along the way. Queen Lyra sat alone in her chambers, the faint glow of Earth's moonlight filtering through the expansive crystal windows. The stars, usually her source of solace, seemed distant and cold. Her thoughts lingered on the man she had met, the human named Ethan. His words had pierced her isolation, stirring something she hadn't felt in years, curiosity about someone who expected nothing from her. But her musings were interrupted by a sharp chime at the door. "Enter," she called, her voice steady, masking the turmoil within. Advisor Kale stepped in, his expression as unreadable as always. Tall and clad in the shimmering regalia of Antharian's elite, he exuded authority. Yet, behind his composed demeanor, Lyra sensed an undercurrent of tension. "Your Majesty," Kale began, bowing deeply. "The delegation meeting with Earth's representatives has been scheduled for tomorrow. However, there are concerns." Lyra arched an elegant brow. "Concerns?" Kale hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Certain factions within our court feel Earth is unworthy of an alliance. They argue its resources would be better claimed directly than negotiated for." Her jaw tightened. She had anticipated dissent, but not outright defiance. "Our mission here is one of peace," she replied firmly. "We do not conquer, we uplift." Kale nodded but didn't meet her gaze. "Of course, Your Majesty. Still, it would be wise to remain vigilant. Not all share your vision." As Kale departed, Lyra's unease grew. She had fought hard to maintain her planet's values against those who sought power at any cost. If dissent had reached her inner circle, the threat to her mission, and perhaps Earth itself, was far greater than she'd realized. Ethan, meanwhile, was oblivious to the growing storm. He spent the following day scanning job boards, his focus broken only by the occasional memory of his strange encounter with the Queen. It felt surreal, like a dream too vivid to shake off. His routine was disrupted when his doorbell buzzed. Expecting his landlord, he opened it cautiously, only to find Sarah standing there, a grin on her face and 2 steaming cups of coffee in hand. "Thought you could use a pick-me-up," she said, breezing past him into the apartment. Ethan chuckled despite himself. "You know, most people text before showing up unannounced." "And missed the chance to see your charming decor," Sarah teased, gesturing to his cluttered kitchen table. "Anyway, I came to tell you something crazy. The Queen's delegation. They're hosting a public forum tomorrow, and guess who got us tickets?" Ethan blinked. "Why would I go to that?" "Why wouldn't you?" Sarah shot back. "You've been moping around for weeks. Maybe seeing her again will, I don't know, inspire you." Ethan shook his head, but didn't argue further. Deep down, part of him wanted to see Lyra again, if only to prove to himself that their fleeting connection hadn't been a figment of his imagination. The forum was held in a vast amphitheater, its architecture blending human design with Antharian technology. Floating lights illuminated the stage, where Queen Lyra and her advisors sat in regal splendor. Her presence was magnetic, her words a perfect balance of diplomacy and encouragement as she addressed the crowd. Ethan stayed in the back, trying to blend in, but he couldn't help feeling a strange pull toward her. She spoke of unity and mutual growth, her vision for a partnership that could propel both species into a brighter future. Yet, as she spoke, Ethan noticed something unusual. A group of her advisors exchanged furtive glances, their whispered conversations laced with tension. One of them, a man with sharp features and an air of authority, seemed particularly uneasy. Ethan's curiosity turned to alarm when the man slipped away from the stage, moving toward a side exit. It wasn't his business, Ethan told himself. But something about the man's demeanor felt wrong, and before he knew it, he was following him. Ethan trailed the man through a series of corridors, his heart pounding. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, only that he couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The advisor stopped in a dimly lit room where several figures waited. Their voices were low, but Ethan caught enough to understand the gravity of what they were discussing. Earth's resources could sustain Anthurian for centuries, one of them said. The Queen's ideals are a hindrance to progress. If she won't act, we will, another added. The humans are too naive to resist. Ethan's breath hitched. This wasn't just dissent, it was a conspiracy. He leaned in closer, trying to hear more, but his foot accidentally knocked over a loose panel. The sound echoed, and the conspirators turned as one. Who's there? Panic surged through Ethan as he bolted down the corridor. Shouts followed him, but he managed to slip away into the crowded forum, his mind racing. He had stumbled into something far bigger than himself, and he had no idea what to do next. Back on stage, Queen Lyra noticed the commotion but couldn't discern its cause. However, the unease in her court's ranks was becoming impossible to ignore. As the forum concluded, she resolved to dig deeper, determined to root out any threats to her mission. Little did she know, her path would soon cross with Ethan's once more, as both of them found themselves fighting against forces determined to tear apart the fragile peace between their worlds. Would you like me to continue with Part 5? Let me know, and I'll keep the story moving with the same suspense and intrigue. The streets outside the amphitheater buzzed with the lingering energy of the forum. Ethan weaved through the crowd, adrenaline still coursing through his veins. He had no plan, no idea what to do with what he'd overheard, only a sinking certainty that the Queen was in danger. He barely noticed Sarah running up behind him until she grabbed his arm. "Hey, where have you been?" she asked, breathless. "You disappeared halfway through the speech." Ethan hesitated. How could he explain what he'd just witnessed without sounding insane? He glanced around, ensuring they weren't being followed. I saw something weird. Something about the Queen's people." Sarah's brow furrowed. "Weird how?" "Like dangerous weird," Ethan replied, his voice low. "There's a group planning something. Against Earth. Maybe against her." Sarah's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Okay, this is big. Do you tell the Queen? The authorities? Someone?" Ethan shook his head. "I don't even know who I can trust. These people are high up, her own advisors. If I go to the wrong person..." Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder, grounding him. "Then we'll figure it out. Together. But you're not doing this alone, Ethan." He gave her a weak smile, appreciating her steady presence. "Thanks. But first, I need to think." That same night, Queen Lyra summoned a private meeting of her closest confidants. Kale stood at her side, along with a small circle of loyal advisors. The tension in the room was palpable. "I've felt it for weeks," Lyra began, her tone sharp yet composed. "There are fractures in our court. Individuals who would see this alliance with Earth fail. I need to know who they are before they act." Kale inclined his head. "Your Majesty, I've already begun discreet inquiries, but rooting out dissent at this level will take time." "Time is a luxury we may not have," Lyra countered. "If these factions act, it could destroy everything we've built here, and worse, draw Earth into a conflict it is not prepared for." Another advisor, Minister Ilan, stepped forward. "Perhaps it would be wise to limit Earth's involvement until we've stabilized our own ranks." Lyra shook her head. "No, withholding trust will only confirm their worst fears about us. Earth is our partner, not our pawn." As the meeting continued, Cal's gaze flicked briefly toward the door, his expression unreadable. Ethan couldn't stay away. Despite Sarah's protests, he returned to the amphitheater the following evening, lurking near the diplomatic quarters. His instincts told him that if something was going to happen, it would be soon. Sure enough, He spotted the same advisor from the previous night slipping out of the Queen's chambers. This time, Ethan didn't hesitate. He followed at a safe distance, his heart hammering as they moved through the labyrinthine corridors. The advisor entered a secluded room, and Ethan edged closer, trying to stay hidden. He caught fragments of conversation, enough to confirm that the conspiracy was escalating. Tomorrow night, one of the voices said, "The human dignitaries will be vulnerable. We strike then. Blame Earth for the fallout, and the Queen will have no choice but to take control." Ethan's blood ran cold. They were planning an attack, one that would shatter the Alliance and implicate Earth. He backed away slowly, his mind racing. Before he could retreat entirely, a hand clamped down on his shoulder. He spun around, his heart leaping into his throat, only to find himself face to face with Queen Lyra. Lyra had been restless, walking the corridors alone to clear her mind. When she'd spotted the human from the forum skulking near her chambers, she recognized him instantly. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice low but commanding. Ethan froze, caught between relief and terror. "Your Majesty, I need to talk to you. It's about your advisors." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "What about them?" "There's a group planning to sabotage the Alliance," Ethan blurted. "They're staging an attack tomorrow night on Earth's dignitaries. They want to make it look like Earth is responsible." For a moment, Lyra said nothing, her gaze piercing. Then she gestured for him to follow her. "Come with me. Now." Ethan hesitated. "Are you going to?" "I said now," she interrupted, her tone brooking no argument. She led him to a private chamber, where she activated a security seal. The room hummed with energy, ensuring their conversation couldn't be overheard. "Tell me everything," Lyra demanded. Ethan recounted what he had overheard, his words tumbling out in a frantic rush. Lyra listened intently, her expression growing darker with each revelation. When he finished, she regarded him silently for a long moment. "You're either very brave or very foolish to involve yourself in this." "Maybe both," Ethan admitted. "But I couldn't just do nothing." A faint smile touched her lips, though it was tinged with sadness. "Bravery like yours is rare, Ethan. I believe you. And now, we must act." Ethan's heart lifted briefly before the weight of the situation crushed it again. "What do we do?" Lyra's eyes hardened, her resolve clear. "We stop them. Together. Would you like me to continue with their plan to thwart the conspiracy? Let me know how you'd like the story to unfold." Ethan paced the length of the secured chamber, his nerves fraying. "Together," he repeated, looking at Queen Lyra. "I don't think you understand. I'm just a guy from Earth. I'm not trained for this kind of thing." Lyra regarded him calmly, her royal demeanor tempered with an undercurrent of urgency. "Courage is not always trained, Ethan. Often, it is simply found in those who refuse to look away. And I need someone outside my circle to trust." Her words steadied him, if only slightly. He stopped pacing and met her gaze. "All right. So what's the plan? Because this attack sounds huge." Lyra turned to a console embedded in the wall and began typing commands, a glowing map of the diplomatic complex projected into the air. "The dignitaries' reception tomorrow will be held here," she said, pointing to a grand hall. "If the conspirators act, they will likely exploit vulnerabilities in this area." Ethan studied the map, his brow furrowing. "That's a lot of ground to cover. Do we even know what kind of attack they're planning?" "No," Lyra admitted, "which is why we'll focus on containment and exposing the perpetrators. The key is to act decisively without tipping off the rest of my court. If this plot is as deep as it seems, we cannot risk alerting the wrong people." "And you trust me to help you with that?" Ethan asked, incredulous. Lyra gave him a small, knowing smile. "Your presence is unexpected. They won't be watching you." Ethan exhaled, his mind racing. "Okay, what's my role in all this?" The next evening, the grand hall glittered with light, its polished floors and crystalline fixtures dazzling under the artificial glow. Human and Antherian dignitaries mingled, their conversations a low hum of diplomacy. Lyra moved through the crowd like a force of nature, her regal presence commanding attention while concealing the storm brewing beneath her composed exterior. Ethan stood at the edge of the room, wearing a hastily procured formal suit that didn't quite fit. He felt like an imposter, but Lyra's words echoed in his mind. No one will suspect you. His role was simple in theory: observe, listen, and report any suspicious activity. But as the minutes ticked by, the weight of the task pressed down on him. Across the room, Lyra kept Kel close, his presence a calculated display of loyalty. She leaned toward him, speaking in a low voice. "Do you have the security team in position?" "They're stationed near the main entrances," Kel replied, "and I'd alerted trusted guards to sweep the side corridors." "Good," Lyra said, scanning the room. "Keep a sharp eye on Minister Ilin. I suspect she may be at the center of this." Kel inclined his head, though his expression betrayed his unease. "And the human?" Lyra's gaze flicked toward Ethan. "He'll play his part." As the evening unfolded, Ethan's nerves began to settle, replaced by a growing sense of vigilance. He noticed Minister Ilin near the buffet table, speaking to a cluster of advisors. Something about her movements struck him as off, too calculated, too watchful. He discreetly adjusted the small communicator hidden in his jacket cuff. "Queen Lyra," he whispered, "I think Ellen's making a move." "Where?" Lyra's voice came through, calm but sharp. "Near the west side," Ethan replied. "She's with a group, but she keeps glancing toward the staff entrance." Lyra's reply was immediate. "Stay close, but don't engage. I'll handle it." Ethan swallowed hard. Staying close sounded easier than it was. As he maneuvered through the crowd, keeping a wary eye on Elin, his pulse quickened. He caught a glimpse of her slipping something small and metallic into the palm of one of her companions, a device of some kind. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and a low vibration rippled through the floor. Gasps and murmurs spread through the room as the ambience shifted from celebratory to tense. Ethan's communicator buzzed. "Ethan," Lyra's voice came through, urgent now. "They've begun. Get out of there." But before Ethan could move, a deafening explosion shook the west side of the hall. Smoke billowed into the air, and chaos erupted as guests scrambled for safety. Ethan ducked behind a pillar, coughing through the haze. He saw Elin moving swiftly toward an exit, her composure intact even amid the pandemonium. Adrenaline surged through him, and he made a split-second decision. He ran after her. "Hey, stop," he shouted, his voice hoarse. Elin glanced back, her expression darkening when she saw him. She raised her hand, and the small device she'd been holding glowed with ominous energy. Ethan froze, panic flooding his system. Before she could activate it, however, a figure emerged from the smoke. Lyra, her movements fluid and commanding. In one swift motion, she disarmed Elin, the device clattering to the floor. "You've betrayed your people," Lyra said, her voice ice-cold. Elin sneered. "You've betrayed them, Your Majesty. You and your naive vision of peace." As guards closed in to apprehend Elin, Lyra turned to Ethan. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head, still catching his breath. "No. But what now?" Lyra's expression softened, though her resolve remained. "Now we clean this up, and we ensure it never happens again." Ethan nodded, a new determination settling over him. Whatever came next, he was ready to stand by her side. The aftermath of the explosion left the diplomatic hall in shambles. Smoke hung in the air like a heavy curtain, dimming the opulence of the space. Guests were being escorted out by guards, some in shock, others furious at the breach of security. Lyra stood amidst the chaos, her regal demeanor intact as she issued commands. Ethan leaned against a pillar, catching his breath. His chest heaved, his mind racing to process what had just happened. The adrenaline had begun to wear off, leaving exhaustion in its place. Lyra approached him, her expression a mix of gratitude and steel. Your instincts were right, she said. You may have just prevented something far worse. Ethan straightened, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah, but what about the explosion? People could have been hurt. And Elin, what the hell was she planning? Lyra's gaze shifted toward the corridor where Ellen had been taken under heavy guard. We'll find out soon enough. She'll answer for this. Cale appeared at her side, his face grim. Your Majesty, the immediate threat has been neutralized, but there's a deeper problem. What is it? Lyra asked. Cale hesitated, glancing at Ethan before continuing. The device Elin used. It's not Antherian technology. It's Earth-made. Ethan's stomach sank. Earth-made? Are you saying someone from my planet supplied her? Cale nodded. It seems so. And if Earth factions are involved, this plot may go beyond Elin. Lyra's jaw tightened, her mind racing. The fragile alliance between Antherian and Earth had already been strained. This revelation could shatter it completely. Hours later, Lyra and Ethan convened in her private quarters, far from the prying eyes of the court. A holographic map hovered between them, displaying Earth and Antherian's interconnected political ties. This complicates everything, Lyra said, pacing. If word gets out that Earth was involved in this attack, it could lead to retaliation, or worse, war. Ethan rubbed his temples. And here I thought tonight was going to be about fancy speeches and appetizers. Lyra paused, a faint smile breaking through her otherwise tense expression. I appreciate your humor, Ethan. But this is serious. We need to find out who's behind this, on both sides. Ethan straightened, determination hardening his features. All right. What do we do next? Lyra gestured to the map. We start with Elin. She knows more than she's admitted. Cale is overseeing her interrogation, but I want you there too. Me? Ethan asked, surprised. Yes, Lyra said firmly. She may underestimate you, which could give us an advantage. And I trust you. Her words struck a chord in Ethan, but he didn't have time to dwell on them. He nodded. Okay, let's do it. The interrogation room was stark, its cold metallic walls amplifying the tension within. Elin sat chained to a chair, her once elegant demeanor now frayed. Cale stood nearby, his arms crossed, while Ethan lingered near the door, trying to seem inconspicuous. Lyra entered, her presence commanding the room. She took a seat across from Elin, her expression unreadable. Minister Elin, she began, her voice calm but firm. You've committed an act of treason, the punishment for which, you know, is severe. But if you cooperate, leniency may be considered. Elin's lips curled into a bitter smile. Leniency? From you? Spare me the charade, Lyra. You've already decided my fate. I decided nothing, Lyra replied evenly. That depends on you. Tell me who supplied you with the device. Who on earth is working with you? Elin's silence was telling, her gaze darting briefly toward Ethan before she caught herself. Lyra noticed. She leaned forward, her tone softening. This doesn't have to end badly, Elin. You've been missiled by those who would destroy everything we've built. Help me stop them. For a moment, Elin hesitated, her resolve faltering. But then she straightened, her expression hardening. You think you're so noble, don't you? But your dream of peace is an illusion. The Council will see it too, when they realize Earth isn't our ally, but our enemy. Lyra sighed, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She stood, gesturing to Cale. Take her back to her cell. She'll talk eventually. As Cale escorted Elin out, Ethan stepped forward. She's not going to crack, is she? Not yet, Lyra admitted. But everyone has a breaking point, and we don't have the luxury of waiting. What's the alternative? Ethan asked. Lyra's eyes met his, determination blazing within them. We find the Earth connection ourselves, and we end this before it begins. Ethan nodded, his resolve matching hers. Then let's get to work. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and deception. But together, they would face it head-on, bridging the divide between their worlds one step at a time.